In chapter 1, the Alter Rebbe explained that the Baal Shem Tov teaches that when Hashem created the world, He created the world in such a way that every single second is being recreated. What does that mean? That means the words that Hashem said, let there be light, etc., the 10 utterances, are still every single day creating the world, not just the world, not just the sun, the moon, and the stars. Every single blade of grass, every single existence in the world is being created right now by Hashem's words that were said then and continuously said over and over. Not only does it apply to animals and people and plants, this even applies to rocks, stones, water. That's what the point we made in chapter 1. We actually said something more than this. Not only is Hashem recreating the world every second, but the koyach that Hashem uses to create the world, that really is the world, which means when you see reality, you're seeing a distorted view of reality. Reality is that this cup is being pushed into existence by Hashem. It seems to us it exists on its own, which means the reality that Hashem is constantly recreating the world is not seen. That is something which is true. It's the fact, but we don't see it. We see a cup that seems to exist very fine on its own. It doesn't need anyone to make it exist. It seems happy existing. That's the part we don't see. I don't even feel it. It's like I have to clear it. I feel like if I clear it, I'm fine. Now the Alter Rebbe explains like this. Chapter 2. He's now going to express something fascinating and important, obviously. And that is that this idea that the world is being constantly recreated by Hashem every single second, that is the window to understand a question that was asked by the minim. A min is someone who believes in God, but believes in the God that he created in his mind. What does that mean? He ascribes to a higher power. There's a supreme being, but in the way I understand him, his existence is what I understand. In other words, they believe Hashem created the world, no different than a person who creates a chair or a person manufactures a cell phone. Genius, brilliant, artist, he's the creator, he's the source. But when he's done, he can walk away. The good news is when you buy a cup, you don't have to have the person who made the cup follow you home. Imagine the guy has to come home with you the whole time and say, okay, I got it covered, it's going, it's good. He lives somewhere in China, he's 9 years old, and he's happy. And we live here and we have the cup and it works fine, even without his constant involvement. Why? Because he didn't create the cup. He reshaped the material. And that's the mistake of the minim. The minim believe that Hashem created the world like a manufacturer creates a product. You have the materials and you build it. And when it's built, you walk away. Says the Alter Rebbe, their mistake is compounded, or is actually a chain reaction of mistake after mistake after mistake. He's going to point out 3 mistakes they make. They make 3 mistakes. Each one's dependent on the previous mistake. They make a new mistake. And this is a very important insight into how we see the world, how we see miracles, and how we see Hashgacha Pratis. Inside, page Ayin Zayah, bottom of the page. Mequon shows Haminim. From here we have the answer to the minim. Now a min should not be confused with an apikaris. An apikaris is someone who says, I don't believe in God. This is more like a theist. A theist, I believe in God. I believe there's a God. And God is powerful, all powerful. But and not just that. They believe in God in the way to protect God's dignity. They say he doesn't waste time with the world. Imagine a CEO of a company, and you ask him, you know, the company has 1,000 employees, and the employees we have preschool. The preschool has lunches every day. I mean, want to know your opinion if the lunch, when they make the tuna salad for the kids, should they put in green beans or not? He's like, leave me alone. I don't care. I am here for the big stuff. I care if they put green beans in the kids' tuna fish or not. The minim say, when you're saying that God's involved with the world after it's created, you're making him seem like a person that's like a CEO who's involved with the little. You think Hashem cares? You think it matters to him what goes on every day in this world? It's meaningless. In the big scheme of things, we're a blip in time, we're a blip in space, we're a blip in value. You think Hashem cares what flavor or what behavior a person does? On a side note, there's a very geschmackes story with the Rebbe. This Israeli boy, but this boy who spoke Hebrew. He came in and he asked the Rebbe in Yechidus, why does God, who's so great, care if I use a fleishik spoon to eat cottage cheese? He has nothing else in the world that bothers him. He's thinking the whole day, oh, Yankel's going to use a meat spoon to eat cottage cheese. Kaput. The whole system's messed up. I'm nobody in this big picture. Why does God care? So the Rebbe said, I don't understand the question. So you figure, I'll ask it in Hebrew. The Rebbe probably understands Hebrew better. He starts asking the question in Hebrew. The Rebbe says, no. I understand what you asked. I don't understand the question. Hashem didn't give you the mitzvah of milchiks and fleishiks and kashrus for his benefit. He gave it to you for your benefit. He gave it to you for a way for you to connect. In other words, Hashem cares only because it's something important to you. But it gets back to our question, why does Hashem care what goes on here? The CEO metaphor is a bad metaphor because there's a relationship between the CEO and his entire company. In Hashem's eyes, the world, as we spoke in previous chapters, is so insignificant. We said it wouldn't even make it on his resume. Hashem created the world. He wouldn't even put it on his resume. It's embarrassing. That's who I am. That's nothing. Hashem is so much greater. So the minim say, why do you have to say Hashem created the world and recreates it every second and following the world? That's foolish. Hashem is not some little kid playing in the sand. Hashem is a big, grand God. You think he has time for petty stuff like world? So we say like this. He says their whole mistake comes from a lack of understanding. And just to give my metaphor, this is not the Alter Rebbe's metaphor, this is again my way I understand this. If you see the world as something I created, and it's a giant world with billions and trillions of parts, and billions of galaxies, and billions of species, and out of species, but billions and billions of actual animals in existence and all different creatures, then you can say, what do I care, this grand builder, about some grasshopper living in Africa, if he crosses the leaf or doesn't cross the leaf, if he stands up straight or doesn't stand up straight. Well, we all know that's only true for something I made. What if it's me? A person cares about his toe, his pinky toe, his small little finger, as much as anything else. Why? Because it's my toe. Remember, Hashem didn't create the world as something separate from himself. Hashem created the world. It is himself. This cup is Hashem's self expressed in a beautiful cup that holds refreshing tea that soothes the soul. I think this class is going down in history as one of the good ones. The good news is, as I'm sitting here, my throat feels better. By the time I'm done, I might be singing opera. Bottom line is, so the minim have this mistake. What's the mistake? A couple mistakes here. Number one, he says, Mequon shuvas haminim v'gili sherish to asam. Now we could see the mistake of the minim, the answer to the minim, and the source of their mistake. You know, we like talking in the media about the root cause. Root cause is good by some things. Other times it doesn't help. When you want to solve a problem, root cause is important. You can't just treat the symptoms, you got to treat the cause. What is the cause of the min's messed up perspective? It's a flawed analogy, it's a flawed comparison. And this is amazing. The Alter Rebbe says, what's their flaw? They reject Hashgacha Pratis. Hashgacha Pratis is one of the primary teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. Before the Baal Shem Tov, there was a belief that Hashem wants a certain plan to happen. That's going to happen. Hashem wants the Jews to go out of Egypt. Hashem wants to get the Torah. Hashem wants the Jews to have Israel. Hashem wants it to be a nation, eventually Mashiach. Hashem wants a general master plan. That's Hashem's Hashgacha Klalos, a general guidance by Hashem. Baal Shem Tov says no. The world is Hashgacha Pratis. What does Hashgacha Pratis mean? That every detail in the world matters. Not just it matters, Hashem willed it so. A blade of grass, and there's a metaphor we said a number of times, when a leaf falls from a tree, says the Baal Shem Tov, not only is it important which leaf falls from the tree, but how many times it turns over as it falls to the ground matters. Not that it matters to this leaf, it matters to the grand master plan of creation. No different than a scientist or a web designer who's typing in code And he says every single letter I'm putting in matters. Not just for that letter, for all the code. Why does it matter? Because the whole code doesn't work if you change one detail. Therefore, says the Baal Shem Tov, that's how the world functions. To believe that, you have to believe that Hashem right now is watching every blade of grass, every leaf, every grasshopper, every frog, every worm, every person in Nigeria, every person in America. That Hashem is watching each behavior, each car that drives. So we believe, as Chassidim, as Jews, as followers of Hashem Tov, that Hashem's guidance is 1,000% focused on every single individual detail of the world. And this is a phenomenal idea. They say, says the minim, says those the theists, those who reject God's Hashgacha Pratis, but they believe in the Supreme Being. That's ridiculous. Not just that, they say miracles are beloved mises. You think a miracle is real? You think Hashem is wasting time and saying, you know what I need to do now? We need to make the oil last for 8 days. We need to make a sea split. That's nature. Nature is what does it. There's a wind that blows and it makes a tide, a high tide, low tide. The oil burns slow. You never saw candles last longer. You have 5 candles, some burn out in 4 hours, some burn out in 2 hours. Well, you're going to start thinking it's a miracle. They reject the whole idea of miracles. It's random. Why? It's based on one thing. Hashem created the world and abandoned his involvement. This is the key element of uniqueness of the rejected philosophic view of God's relationship with the world, that they believe, many of these rejectors of truth, these heretics, thank you, they reject the truth of Hashem's involvement because they think Hashem created the world like a carpenter creates a chair, like a person who builds furniture builds a desk. But he doesn't have to follow you home because he did his job, he's done. It exists without him. And we're going to explain why they're so wrong. Third line. And they reject all the miracles of the Torah. They make a mistake with their chutzpahdik, their audacious imagination. They compare in their minds Hashem creating heavens and earth like a man who's doing his stuff. They say Hashem, yeah, just like Yaakov could build a nice chair, just like this lady could sew a nice dress, Hashem can build a nice world. He's incredible. He's God. He can do anything. But now that he's done building the world, just like the tailor doesn't have to follow you home, he can send out in the mail the suit and it lasts fine. Hashem doesn't. Hashem is such a good carpenter. He says, you think Hashem is such a failed carpenter that God forbid that he has to stay with the world the whole time? Hashem says, go, and it goes. So let's say that when a vessel goes out from the hands of the craftsman, the vessel, the furniture, the dish, has no longer a need for the creator. When the painter finishes the painting, as beautiful as it is, he could leave and get to the next job. Why? Because even though he took his hands off the piece, he's done, he finished the project. He could leave, go down the street. The vessel continues to exist in its shape and its form and its function. It still works, even he doesn't say, you know what, I built you a phone. If I'm not involved with it, it won't ring. He's done. He did his job completely because he invested all of his efforts, all of his energies into creating something from material that he had. Same thing, these fools. It's amazing how the Rebbe uses these expressions. He says these fools, because it's such an ignorant, we're going to see later on, expression that he uses. The Alter Rebbe is a very refined person, obviously, but the absolute foolishness, the complete blunt, glumpy, ignorance that they're using to explain God, he uses later, I think, an expression. I'm not sure if this chapter later. He says, like somebody wanting to describe how smart somebody is. He says, you know, my teacher is so smart and so deep in his teachings. There's not one of his teachings I could fit into my pockets. I couldn't even fit it into a box. I couldn't even hold it in my hands. The Alter Rebbe says that's foolish. Why? You can't use expressions of weight and size on a thought, on a teaching. They're talking with words that don't match what they're talking about. Doesn't make any sense. But he says the mistake they're making is that they're comparing Hashem to someone building a chair, someone manufacturing a cell phone. When you build a chair, manufacture a cell phone, your job is done, you go home. They missed the point. Tach is like when you put schmutz on a lens. He says their eyes are covered with schmutz, with like mud. The great difference between with a man who creates artwork, his creations, and they're just taking something and reshaping it. What's he doing? Picture clay. Doobie recently gave a class, and he said a famous joke. He said the scientists who figured out they could create the world too. They realized they have machines in the laboratories where they can create. They tell God, we caught up to you in knowledge. We can create like you created the heavens and earth. We can do the same thing. We'll create a mini earth, a mini global universe in this laboratory. It'll be tiny, but mini. God says, let me see. So they bring in a pile of sand, and they turn out, God said, no. Get your own sand. Don't use my sand. Get your own sand. In other words, as long as you're using my stuff, you're not really creating. You're repurposing. You're reshaping. You're modifying. When a woman makes challah, and she takes flour and eggs and water and sugar and salt and whatever else goes into the challah, she is not creating challah. Maybe she's in her artistic, gifted way, she's shaping and molding and finding and combining ingredients to create a new dimension, a new way she's represented. But nothing is new. The eggs were here before, the flour was here before. What she does is she reshapes it and reconnects it and rebonds it with a different mixture, and it comes out beautiful. And she doesn't, and the challah exists when she's done. Why? Because she didn't create the challah. She took ingredients and reshaped them, reformed them to make challah. Their mistake is they're comparing such a reality of a man creating something from Hashem, creating heavens and earth. What does a man do? A man creates, let's say he's building a chair. He takes pre-existing lumber, pre-existing glue, pre-existing nails. He forms a chair. He cuts it, he carves it, he sands it, he polishes it, he paints it, stains it, and it's beautiful. But there's nothing that he created besides the shape and the form. But the material was all there beforehand. So in truth, when you create a chair, we use that expression because you did create it was not a chair. You created this design, but you created the design and the shape, but not the existence. The material was there before you started. It'll be there after you walk away, because you don't create it from nothing. You're reshaping existing material. That's how it works by man creating material. For an example, he says like this. When you take some silver and form a vessel, what are you doing? Let's say this was silver, right? Let's say this was a silver cup, and it's made by a silversmith. All he did was reshape the silver into this particular shape. And now here's the thing that the Rebbe is going to explain in a moment. Not only is the idea that the silver is existing before and he just reshaped it, even the shape existed before. You might say, whoa, where does the shape exist? The potential for the shape of this cup exists within the silver, whereas it did not exist within orange juice. If I wanted to make a cup out of orange juice, I couldn't do it. Why? It doesn't have within it the potential, meaning anything that we create in this world, it's only something that has the potential to become that. We can't take something that doesn't have the potential and create it to something. For example, we cannot take vinegar and make it light on fire. It's not in its nature. So we light oil on fire, we're not creating a new thing called heat. We're taking the power Hashem designed it. It's like a program. Hashem designed this program to be able to calculate stuff, but it can only calculate stuff what the program was designed to do. Silver was designed to be formed and shaped and melted and molded. It could do that. It can't do other stuff. It can't climb a tree. It can't, float, because silver doesn't have it in it. So when you form silver into a shape of a cup, this one has a nice logo on it. Ta-da. So when you shape silver into a cup, you're actually just taking that power, that possibility that was there before, Hashem programmed to do, and you're revealing it. So in truth, you did nothing except reveal the power, the potential that was there, and that takes skill. We're not taking away from the skill involved in doing this, but there is no creation here. You're revealing a potential shape. We have thousands of potential shapes, millions of shapes, and only those can be created. We can't make a floating shape. We can't make something that climbs unless you mix in other wires and batteries, etc., etc. So in other words, when we create something from silver, we're doing nothing more than taking what existed with all its limited potential and shaping it and forming it and bringing out that potential, which is a phenomenal idea, which means creation by man in a dish or a silverware or any creation is literally reshaping, reforming, and bringing out pre-programmed potential. Every single thing in this world has a pre-programmed nature, like water could turn to ice, it can flow downhill, doesn't flow uphill, unless it turns to steam, then it goes up. So, meaning the way everything functions is predetermined. And scientists today have the wisdom to know how each thing will function. Many times they do something, they know what the result's going to be, but they want to prove it. They know if they do this will happen. Sometimes they don't know. Usually they do know, because they want to see they're bringing out a possibility. But scientists cannot create things that are not possible from a potential state of silver or water or sand to become something it can't be. That sand can become glass is only because Hashem designed it that way. The scientists can't say, no, we're going to turn wood to glass. They can't do it. I mean, maybe they could. I have no idea. I'm not a scientist, but they can't do the things that aren't possible. They can't do things that are not in the potential of that source. And they're trying to compare what some builder, some artist, some craftsman does. L'maisei shemayim v'aretz. Now, by the way, I saw that one of the Sfarim that I was reading, preparing, they say if they wanted to do a better metaphor, they could, which would also be wrong, they should have used the metaphor of the sun and the light of the sun. So the sun and light of the sun, there you see something that exists only as long as a source is there. That would have been good. See, the sun ball, the sun, or what's the word? Circle, sphere. The sun sphere. If it's really just gas or what, but the sun sphere, that gives out light. If something blocks, or for some reason the sun stops shining, all the light that comes out of it ceases to exist, because it never really had identity for itself. Light is only a shine of the source. That would have been a better metaphor, but even that's wrong, as we'll see soon. But to compare it to a man making a product and walking away, that's utter foolishness, as we'll see in a moment, based on one important rule. This is the rule we have to have throughout this whole subject, and we'll get into a couple examples. The rule is anything which goes against the status, let's use the word default, the default status, and needs a chiddush, a novel new reality, that will only exist as long as something is pushing that reality to be. For an example, rolling a rock uphill. Rolling a rock uphill is not natural. It only goes uphill as long as there's a force pushing it. Whether the force is your hand, a very powerful wind, a rope pulling it, the second that force stops, it goes back to its natural state of gravity, being pulled downwards. The same thing, by nature, by definition, the world's existence doesn't make sense. It's a non-possibility. It only exists because Hashem is making it exist. That means the second you're trying to go to a state where there's no longer the power pushing it, it's not going to slowly stop. It ceases immediately, because the only thing holding that rock up, so to speak, is the pressure, the force of someone going against his nature, against his default status. The default status is that there's no world. So the fact that the world exists for any amount of time is only possible as long as the energy, the letters are being each moment created. That means right this second, this cup is being created. We had somebody speak at the show a while ago who explained that, I don't know if it's the same true today, because I don't know, this is a number of years ago, but he explained that on computer screens or TV screens or screens in general, the image is recreated every single second. That it's not actually a continuous image. It's, again, you can Google this and find out if I'm wrong or right, I don't know. But that every single second, the screen is a new image appearing on the screen. And when you're watching something happen, it's only because it's happening so fast, there's no break between it. And he explained that the scientists or the builders, the designers, got it to a speed where it doesn't bother our eyes. I mean, if it would go slower, you'd feel like sometimes you take a video or a camera or something, and the screen looks like it's shaking because it's catching that recreating the scene every second. But that's the reality of the world. We don't notice it because it's all so smooth and so pure in its function. But every single second, Hashem is recreating the world. Okay, how do we know that? Because if you would stop for 1 second, the world will cease to exist. As we'll go through this, one of the main points here. Based on that, they come to a second mistake. If Hashem abandoned the world and he's not recreating every second, then Hashgacha Pratis, Hashem's not involved. Things happen. Their mistake in believing in divine providence and every single thing being guided by God is that they don't believe the world's being created every second. If you believe it's being created every second, then right now Hashem decided again, this should be here. This should be here. But the situation, the challenge, the moment of stress, the blessings, all that comes because right now that moment's being recreated. Hashem and his giant computer system calculates all the things in the world, and he decides right now, continue this, continue this, continue this. There are times things don't continue because Hashem decided it's not needed anymore. We don't know why. Good things, bad things, or shouldn't say bad. Things that feel bad, let's say painful and hurtful and sad. There is no bad in front of Hashem, just hurtful and sad to us. Like the kid getting a shot and the little boy getting the polio shot or something. It hurts, but it's the best thing that you could do for him as a mom is make sure he gets the shot he needs. So, but they hurt. So the same is true of the minute mistake. Because they don't believe in the constant recreation, but they believe in a God. Therefore, they don't believe in Hashgacha practice, and therefore they don't believe in miracles for the same reason. You only need a miracle if you believe right now what Hashem is creating this second is not exactly what He wants to do the next second. So then you need a miracle to change the status. Right now, I'm constantly creating. Let's say the story with that his daughters bought by mistake. I think it was his daughters bought by mistake vinegar instead of oil for Shabbos, and they realized, hey, we can't light Shabbos candles. He says, girls, they were crying. The same God who commands oil to burn could command vinegar to burn. What does that mean? The same way Hashem creates the world right now with the nature oil can burn. So for the next 20 minutes, He'll make it nature that vinegar burns. And that's what happens. They burnt. They worked. So a miracle means that Hashem is changing these seconds of creation, these moments, these infant, whatever the word is, these sub particles of seconds. There's a word for it. I don't know what. Or these tiny microseconds. These microseconds, Hashem is recreating them in a way that's needed right now. And that's why we believe in Hashgacha practice, and we never get scared. We might be uncomfortable because we're normal, we're humans, but a Jew shouldn't be afraid because right now this situation is being created by God. Not always do we stand at that level of faith to feel it when the moment of crisis happens. Sometimes we look back and say, how was I so scared? Why was I so worried? But the reality is right now, when something happens, it seems to be a challenge or a shock or a fear. What's the concern? Hashem is making this happen. Hashem is doing this. Trust Him. He knows what He's doing. He does a good job. And therefore, their whole perspective of God's relationship to the world is different because of all this one mistake. Now, the Alter Rebbe, I'll start off with this and we'll continue next week. The Alter Rebbe is going to now explain one of the greatest examples of where you see Hashem's most creative-like event in history. And we have a few of them. One of the famous ones is the miracle of Hanukkah. One of the famous ones is the miracle of burning bush. One of the other famous ones is the miracle of the splitting of the sea. The splitting of the sea is considered one of the greatest miracles that ever happened. We ever use the expression, it says, difficult to split in the sea. You think, what Hashem's like, wow, my muscles are so sore. That was a hard job. I had to split the sea all night. Man, you guys couldn't walk faster? Come on. I mean, what does it mean that it was difficult? You see, the splitting of the sea is also compared to another thing that's very hard. It says in Gemara Saita that a marriage is as difficult as splitting the sea. That's interesting. Why we use that metaphor? As a marriage, Hashem's making a marriage is like as difficult. They say, the Gemara says, what does Hashem do all day long? He's making shidduchim. He's checking on shidduchim. It's like splitting the sea. What's the similarity between a marriage and splitting the sea? It's amazing. Splitting the sea is demanding the impossible should take place. We want water, which is nature is to flow, to stand up like a wall. I'm going to explain in detail what that means next week when we do this chapter, we do this part. We want to stand up like a wall and be, now, there's a discussion, if the wall stood in the fashion of loose water, which means, could you stick your hand in to the water, or did it become hard? And we'll see, it seems like from here that it became hard, which is even a bigger chiddush, as we'll see soon. Some people say it didn't become hard, it remained water, like the miracle, it didn't flow. But the water, which is naturally created to be flowing, went against its own nature. What's that similar to? Similar to a marriage. A marriage, by definition, should not work. It doesn't make sense. You have two people brought up in two different homes, opposite personalities, very different, unique perspectives on how to handle every crisis situation, simcha, emergency. Two different ways, how the parents did it, how their parents did it. How my nature is, how this person's nature is, and you expect these two people to live in the same house and get along? Maybe the first hour, if you're lucky. The only way it works is because each of them make a commitment, I'm going to push and make it work. The second one stops working on their marriage, and it's not a critique. I'm not getting into times when the marriage has to end for other reasons. That's something which is unfortunately in life. We're talking about in general. A marriage will only work if both partners work on it. Otherwise, one of two things. Otherwise, it's going to be, unfortunately, a sad marriage, or it's going to be that the marriage won't continue. Why? Because it's not natural for two different people to live in the same house and live the same life. It doesn't make any sense. It's two opposites, like two magnets. They don't come together. You got to push effort. If you put the wrong side of the magnets, that they should come as one. This is the splitting of the sea. The splitting of the sea is the closest thing we have in nature that comes like the creation of heaven and earth. Let's see this inside. And we'll do a couple lines and we'll continue next week. L'maisei shemayim v'aretz to yesh me'ayin. They're trying to compare the creation of heaven and earth, which is making something out of absolute nothing. And this idea of heaven and earth being created is a much greater miracle than splitting of the sea. The splitting of the sea itself is one of the greatest miracles ever. What happened by splitting of the sea? There's a key word Dal is going to focus on here, and that's the word kol. It says that Hashem had a wind that blew, that the force went the entire night. Come on, Hashem. Why couldn't you just have the wind come, set up the wall, and then bring the wind back when you're done to bring it back down? Why do you have to have that every minute of the night the wind's blowing? And the wind doesn't just mean a physical wind. The Ramban says, by the way, that the regular wind that was there was just to mess with the Egyptians. They thought that this was all natural. So they figured if it's natural, we'll also be fine. So they thought it was the wind. Okay, the wind is good. They didn't, Hashem sort of did it like some psychological warfare, as he did in much of Egypt's experiences. And that is that he made them think that this is just the natural event, strong winds, and they weren't as afraid until it was too late. But the bottom line is that wind really was a force of God. The force of God was needed all night long. And the question is why? Why couldn't Hashem split the sea? I mean, first of all, there's other questions we're not going to go into this chapter. Why did Hashem have to split it? He could have made the whole sea turn to rock, walk across, make it into a solid mass, like not cold ice. Make it a hard surface and walk across. It's better than going down and going back up. And all the details. But the main thing is Hashem chose to have it split. And it wasn't a split that it was enough to have a second of split. It had to be a continuous every single second of the water being split by this force, this east wind that blew all night long. And the water is split. The water split, as we know, it split actually into 12 or 13 channels, which makes the miracle even more cool. For just wind, it would have made one big splush, but it was 12 or 13 separate channels. Even more incredible, as we know, that Tosfos says in Gemara Shabbos, that they didn't go across. They made a U-turn and came back out the same side. If the Egyptians who had any brains, they would have waited, and the Jews would have come back out. But they went back. They went in, meaning the whole thing doesn't make sense that it was wind, because wind can't blow 12 paths, 12 tunnels, and a curve. But bottom line is, why did you have to have all night long the wind blowing? And the answer is because Hashem was changing temporarily the nature of water. Water is designed in a certain way that water flows. And the Chumash uses two words, neid and chema. Neid means like when you have water gathered in your fish tank. I used the fish tank on purpose because my fish tank last night lost its seal, and we noticed water flying out, and I had to empty it out. 55 gallons of water. It takes time to empty out. About 10 gallons went into the carpet. The rest we got out. But the bottom line is, when water is gathered, what's keeping the water together? Nothing really. It's just that it can't flow because something's holding it. But the water with the rest of the water doesn't really have a relationship that become one, like in wood, where you could say it's all part of one thing. Happens to be there's something. So neid means like it's gathered. A mikvah is called mikvah mayim when we have a mikvah in Yiddishkeit for many purposes. It says a mikvah is gathered water. It can't be flowing. If it's flowing, it's not kosher. has to be, that's if it's rainwater. If it's rivers or ponds or lakes, it's different. Rainwater has to be gathered in one place. It's a mikvah. Noyid. The second thing is chayma. Chayma means Hashem made the water to feel and act like its heart. Whether it actually felt that way or act that way, that I want to check a little more into, because I found two opinions, so I'll leave it for next week. But the water acted like its heart. Not only did the water, in its nature, suddenly become gathered as if there was a wall on the side, like a fish tank walls, holding it up, or glass walls in the aquarium, holding it up. Furthermore, it actually became its nature that it held itself up. Meaning it not only was gathered, but two miracles happened that also became like a wall. A rock wall does not need anyone to stand hold it up. If it's a good rock wall, especially if you put in good type of concrete or mortar, it stands perfectly fine on its own. No one has to hold it up. Why? Because it becomes like a wall that becomes a solid block. That became the nature of the water, while it's against its natural nature. The natural nature, Hashem creates water every second, is that the water is created as a liquid. And Hashem, every second, as he created like a liquid, he created it back to be like a solid. So it was a constant yesh me'ayin in its most incredible way. This is why we say that Kriyas Yamsuf was so special. And it was saying, and the creation of heavens and earth is many more times like that. So we're going to go now into the understanding of the splitting of the sea, and then we're going to go into, from that, a much greater understanding of the idea of heavens and earth, how it is existing.